The morning sun cast long shadows across Windsor Castle as Camilla sat at her mahogany desk, a cup of Earl Grey steaming beside a stack of ivory invitations. Her fingers traced the elegant gold lettering that announced the upcoming charity gala, an event that would mark her first major solo hosting duty as queen consort. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders, but there was something else weighing on her mind: the guest list. For weeks, palace staff had been meticulously crafting the invitation roster, ensuring every important dignitary, celebrity, and royal family member would receive their coveted invitation. But as Camilla reviewed the final draft, her eyes stopped at one particular name that made her stomach tighten with old resentments and fresh anxieties. Princess Anne. Charles's sister had never made her feelings about Camilla's secret. Even after all these years, even after the wedding and the coronation, Anne's disapproval lingered like morning fog that refused to lift. Every family gathering became a delicate dance of avoiding direct confrontation while navigating the icy politeness that Anne had perfected into an art form. Camilla picked up her Mont Blanc pen, its weight familiar in her hand. She had been in this position before, making difficult decisions about family dynamics and public perception, but this time felt different. This charity gala wasn't just another royal obligation. It was her moment to step fully into her role as queen consort, to prove that she belonged in this family, in this institution, in this life she had fought so hard to claim. The charity itself was close to Camilla's heart, a foundation supporting literacy programs for underprivileged children. She had spent months planning every detail, from a menu featuring sustainable ingredients to the auction items that included pieces from her personal collection. This evening would showcase not just her commitment to charitable causes, but her ability to bring together influential people for meaningful change. As she stared at Anne's name on the list, memories flooded back. The awkward silences during family dinners. The way Anne would address Charles but barely acknowledge her presence. The subtle but cutting remarks disguised as innocent observations. And had a particular talent for making Camilla feel like an outsider in her own home, a guest who had overstayed her welcome in the royal family. The princess had been Charles's confidant long before Camilla entered their lives, and knew him in ways that Camilla was still discovering. His childhood fears, his teenage rebellions, his deepest insecurities about living up to their mother's legacy. This sisterly bond sometimes felt impenetrable, a fortress of shared history that Camilla could observe but never truly enter. Last month's incident at the Easter gathering still stung, and had made a comment about appropriate behavior at formal events, while looking directly at Camilla, referring to a moment when she had laughed heartily at a joke during the church service. It was a minor thing, perhaps even innocent, but the implication was clear. Camilla still didn't understand the unwritten rules of royal conduct. Then there was the matter of precedence, those invisible but crucial hierarchies that governed every royal appearance. And, as the daughter of the late Queen Elizabeth II, held certain traditional privileges that sometimes conflicted with Camilla's new position as queen consort. These tensions played out in subtle ways. Who walked where during processions, who sat where at state dinners, whose charitable patronages received priority coverage in the court circular. Camilla understood that Anne's resistance wasn't entirely personal. The princess had watched the monarchy weather numerous storms, had seen how public opinion could shift like quicksand beneath royal feet. Perhaps Anne's coldness stemmed from a protective instinct, a desire to preserve the institution from any hint of scandal or controversy that might still cling to Camilla's past. The Diana factor loomed large in these dynamics, an elephant in every room that no one dared mention directly, and had loved her former sister-in-law, had watched the fairy tale wedding with genuine joy, had witnessed the devastating collapse that followed. The princess had also seen how that collapse had affected Charles, the guilt, the media scrutiny, the way his reputation had been battered in the court of public opinion. When Charles finally found happiness again with Camilla, Anne's reaction had been complex. Relief that her brother was no longer miserable, certainly, but also wariness about this woman whose relationship with Charles had been born from such complicated circumstances. Could she trust Camilla to put Charles's well-being first? Could she trust her to understand the weight of royal responsibility? These questions had never been directly addressed, but they hung in the air during every interaction. Anne's loyalty to Charles was absolute, but her acceptance of Camilla remained conditional, provisional, subject to constant evaluation. The charity gala represented everything Camilla hoped to achieve in her new role. She wanted to show that she could bring people together, that she could use her position to make a real difference in people's lives. She had personally reached out to business leaders, artists, and philanthropists, building bridges and fostering connections that would benefit the Literacy Foundation for years to come. But Anne's presence threatened to overshadow these achievements. The media would inevitably focus on any interaction between them, analyzing body language and searching for signs of tension. Royal correspondents had made careers out of interpreting the smallest gestures, the briefest glances, the placement of hands during photo opportunities. Camilla could already imagine the headlines: frosty reception, and cold shoulder at charity gala, or royal rift. Body language expert reveals family tensions. These stories would dominate coverage of the event, drowning out any discussion of the actual charitable cause or the funds raised for literacy programs. More troubling was the potential for real conflict during the evening itself, and had a reputation for speaking her mind, for cutting through diplomatic niceties with uncomfortable truths. What if she chose this public moment to express her long-held reservations about Camilla's role in the family? What if the careful choreography of royal protocol broke down under the weight of genuine emotion? The guest list included several of Diana's former friends and charitable collaborators, people who had specifically requested to attend because of the literacy focus, which had been one of Diana's passionate interests. These individuals brought their own complex feelings about Camilla, their own memories of the woman who had been Charles's first wife. Anne's presence would amplify these undercurrents, potentially turning a celebration of literacy into a minefield of unresolved grief and resentment. Camilla's private secretary knocked softly on the door, interrupting her contemplation. "Your Majesty, the final guest list needs to be submitted to security by this afternoon," she said diplomatically, though her eyes conveyed understanding of the dilemma. "Of course," Camilla replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her mind. "I'm just making some final adjustments." As the door closed, Camilla found herself thinking about her own children and stepchildren, about the delicate balance required to blend families even under normal circumstances. How much more complicated when every decision played out under global scrutiny, when every family dinner became potential front-page news. Tom and Laura, her children from her first marriage, had gradually found their place within this extended royal family. They maintained respectful relationships with Charles and had learned to navigate the unique challenges of having a stepfather who happened to be the King of England. But even they sometimes struggled with Anne's formal distance, her unwillingness to embrace them as full family members. William and Harry had their own complex relationships with both Camilla and Anne. William had eventually accepted Camilla's role in his father's life, recognizing how much happiness she brought Charles. Harry's feelings remained more complicated, colored by his grief over Diana and his struggles with royal life in general. Anne's attitude toward Camilla inevitably influenced these dynamics, creating subtle alliances and tensions within the larger family structure. The charity gala was supposed to mark a new chapter, Camilla stepping confidently into her role as queen consort, using her platform to advance causes she cared deeply about. She had worked tirelessly to shed the negative perceptions that had followed her for decades, to prove that she could be an asset to the monarchy rather than a liability. Recent polls showed growing public acceptance of her role, recognition of her dedication to charitable work, appreciation for the stability she had brought to Charles's life. This gala could be the moment when she finally stepped out of the shadows of the past and into the full light of her new position. But Anne's potential presence threatened all of that progress. One uncomfortable exchange, one moment of visible tension, could undo years of careful reputation management. The British press, always hungry for royal drama, would seize on any sign of family conflict and amplify it into a major story. Camilla lifted her pen again, hovering over Anne's name on the guest list. The practical part of her mind argued for removing it. Why invite potential complications when so much was at stake? The emotional part of her heart yearned for genuine family acceptance, for the day when Anne might look at her without reservation, without the weight of history coloring every interaction. She thought about Charles, about how much he loved both his wife and his sister, about how he tried to bridge the gap between them without forcing a reconciliation that neither woman was ready to embrace. He had never asked Camilla to exclude Anne from events, never pressured either of them to pretend feelings they didn't have. His diplomatic approach had maintained family peace, but it had also allowed the underlying tensions to fester unresolved. The late Queen Elizabeth had handled similar family dynamics with characteristic grace, finding ways to acknowledge competing loyalties without forcing impossible choices. But Camilla was still learning how to navigate these waters, still finding her own approach to the delicate art of royal family management. Outside her window, she could see the gardens where she and Charles often walked in the evenings, discussing the day's challenges and planning for the future. Those quiet moments together reminded her why all the struggle had been worthwhile. The deep love they shared, the contentment they had found together, the partnership that had grown stronger through years of public scrutiny. Charles deserved a family that could celebrate together without undercurrents of resentment. He deserved a wife who could host successful events without worrying about family drama overshadowing charitable causes. He deserved a sister who could accept his choices and support his happiness. But Camilla also deserved respect for the position she now held, recognition of her contributions to the monarchy, acknowledgement that she had earned her place through years of dedicated service. She deserved to host events without walking on eggshells, to make decisions based on what was best for the causes she supported rather than what might avoid family conflict. The pen felt heavier in her hand as she contemplated the choice before her. Remove Anne's name and risk Charles's disappointment, create a precedent of excluding family members from major events, and potentially escalate existing tensions into open conflict. Keep Anne's name and risk a public spectacle, media focus on family drama rather than charitable work, and personal stress during what should be a triumph. Neither option felt entirely right, but one choice had to be made. Camilla took a deep breath, thinking about the literacy foundation that had inspired this entire event. She thought about the children who would benefit from the funds raised, the teachers who would receive training, the communities that would gain access to books and educational resources. These are the stakes that truly mattered, not family dynamics or media coverage, but real impact on real lives. With sudden clarity, she made her decision. The nib of her pen touched the paper, and Anne's name disappeared from the guest list with a few decisive strokes. The invitation would not be sent. The charity gala would proceed without the complication of her sister-in-law's presence. As she sealed the finalized list in its envelope, Camilla felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had chosen to prioritize the success of the event over family harmony, to protect her first major solo initiative from potential sabotage. But she also knew that this decision would have consequences, ripples that would extend far beyond one evening's guest list. The die was cast. Now she could only hope that Charles would understand her reasoning, that the gala would be the success she envisioned, and that somehow, someday, there might be a path toward genuine reconciliation with Anne. But for tonight's purposes, she had made her choice. The envelope sat on her desk like a sealed verdict, final and irreversible. In a few hours, the invitations would be dispatched, and there would be no turning back from the course she had chosen. 3 days had passed since the invitations were sent, and the palace buzzed with anticipatory energy as final preparations for the charity gala took shape. Crystal chandeliers were polished to perfection, fresh flowers arranged in stunning displays throughout the ballroom, and the kitchen staff worked tirelessly to prepare a menu that would impress even the most discerning guests. Camilla threw herself into these preparations with enthusiasm, finding comfort in the tangible details she could control. The early responses had been overwhelmingly positive. Business leaders, celebrities, and philanthropists confirmed their attendance with notes expressing genuine excitement about supporting literacy programs. The auction items were generating significant advance interest, with several pieces already attracting competitive preliminary bids. Everything was falling into place exactly as Camilla had envisioned. But beneath this surface success, tension rippled through the palace corridors like an underground current. The household staff, trained to be discreet, nonetheless couldn't help but notice the absence of Princess Anne's name from their preparation lists. No place card to be calligraphed, no dietary requirements to be noted, no security arrangements to be coordinated. The omission spoke loudly in its silence. Charles had been unusually quiet since receiving the final guest list from Camilla's office. He had asked no direct questions, made no explicit comments, but his behavior had shifted in subtle ways that only someone who knew him intimately would recognize. He spent longer periods in his study, emerged for meals with a distracted air, and spoke less during their evening walks through the gardens. Camilla caught these changes immediately. After so many years together, she could read his moods like a familiar book, could sense when something troubled him, even when he tried to maintain his customary composure. She had expected this reaction, had prepared herself for it, but experiencing it still felt like a weight pressing against her chest. The morning of the third day brought an unexpected complication. Lady Sarah Chatto, the Queen's niece, and one of his closest friends within the royal circle, called Camilla's private office with a carefully worded inquiry about the gala. The conversation, relayed by Camilla's secretary, was diplomatically phrased but impossible to misinterpret. Lady Sarah wondered if there might have been some sort of administrative error regarding Princess Anne's invitation. The secretary reported delicately. She mentioned that and had been looking forward to supporting the literacy cause, given her own patronage of several educational charities. The message was clear, and knew she had been excluded, and word was spreading through the extended royal family. This was exactly the scenario Camilla had hoped to avoid, turning a private family decision into a wider court controversy. The royal family's internal networks were intricate and well-informed. Nothing remained secret for long within palace walls. Camilla's stomach tightened as she realized the full implications of Sarah's call. If Anne's close friends were reaching out, it meant the princess was genuinely hurt by the exclusion, not merely annoyed or inconvenienced. Despite their difficult relationship, Camilla had never intended to cause real pain. She had simply wanted to protect an important event from potential complications. That afternoon, while reviewing the final seating arrangements for the gala dinner, Camilla received another indirect message. This time it came through Tom, her son, who had been approached by Peter Phillips and Son during a chance encounter at a London club. The conversation had been casual on the surface, but Peter's questions about the gala had been pointed enough to make Tom uncomfortable. "Mum," Tom said carefully when he called that evening, "I think there might be some family awkwardness brewing." Peter seemed to think there had been some sort of misunderstanding about Aunt Anne's invitation. "I didn't really know what to say." Camilla appreciated her son's diplomatic phrasing, but she could hear the concern in his voice. Tom had worked hard to build good relationships with all his royal step-relatives, understanding how important these connections were for family harmony. He was clearly worried about being caught in the middle of whatever conflict was developing. "I'll handle it, darling," Camilla assured him, though she wasn't entirely sure how. The situation was becoming more complicated than she had anticipated, with tentacles reaching into relationships she hadn't considered when making her original decision. The next morning brought the most challenging development yet. Charles emerged from his study carrying a letter bearing the familiar Gatcombe Park letterhead, Anne's country estate. His expression was carefully neutral, but Camilla could see the tension in his shoulders the slight tightness around his eyes that indicated he was processing something difficult. And as written to ask about the charity gala, he said simply, settling into his favorite armchair with the deliberate movements of someone buying time to choose his words carefully. She's confused about not receiving an invitation and wonders if perhaps there was some sort of postal mishap. The letter lay between them like unexploded ordnance, its presence charging the room with unspoken tension. Camilla knew that and was far too intelligent to believe in a postal mishap, just as she knew that Charles was far too perceptive not to understand exactly what had happened. They were all engaged in an elaborate dance of diplomatic fiction, each pretending not to know what the others clearly understood. "I see," Camilla replied, matching his careful tone. She wanted to explain her reasoning to help him understand why she had made this difficult choice, but the words felt inadequate in the face of his obvious discomfort. How could she articulate her fears about media coverage and family drama without sounding petty or vindictive? Charles set the letter aside and looked directly at her, his eyes reflecting a complex mixture of understanding and disappointment. "Darling, I know how much this event means to you. I know how hard you've worked to make it perfect. But Anne is my sister." Those last 5 words carried the weight of a lifetime of shared history, of bonds forged in childhood and strengthened through decades of mutual support. Camilla felt them like a physical blow, not because Charles spoke them unkindly, but because they highlighted the fundamental impossibility of her position. She could be his wife, his queen consort, his partner in all things, but she could never be his sister. "I understand that," she said quietly, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I've never asked you to choose between us, and I'm not asking now. But this gala isn't just another social event, Charles. It's my chance to prove that I can use this position to make a real difference. I can't afford for it to become a spectacle about family tensions." Charles leaned back his chair, his fingers steepled in a gesture she recognized as his thinking pose. She could see him weighing her words against his own sense of family obligation, trying to find a path that honored both his loyalty to his sister and his commitment to his wife's success. "What exactly are you afraid will happen if Anne attends?" he asked gently, his tone suggesting genuine curiosity rather than challenge. The question forced Camilla to confront her fears directly, to articulate anxieties that felt almost too personal to voice. "You know how she looks at me, Charles. Even after all these years, I can feel her disapproval, and the media will pick up on it immediately. Instead of covering the literacy foundation and the money we're raising, they'll write about royal family tensions and cold shoulders at charity gala." "But, darling," Charles said with infinite patience, "excluding her creates exactly the story you're trying to avoid. The media will notice her absence just as surely as they would notice any tension during the event itself." His logic was impeccable, and Camilla felt a sinking realization that she might have made a serious miscalculation. In trying to prevent one type of negative coverage, she had potentially created something worse, a story about deliberate exclusion and family rift that could overshadow the charity gala entirely. "Perhaps," Charles continued carefully, "there might be a way to address this situation before it becomes irreparable." The word irreparable hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Camilla understood that they were no longer just discussing a guest list for one evening's event. They were talking about the fundamental dynamics of their family, about whether compromise and reconciliation were possible, about the precedent this decision would set for future conflicts. But even as she recognized the wisdom in his words, Camilla felt a stubborn resistance rising within her. She had spent years walking on eggshells around Anne's disapproval, years trying to prove herself worthy of acceptance that never quite came. This gala represented her chance to step fully into her role as queen consort, to host an event entirely on her own terms without having to navigate the complex emotional minefield of Anne's expectations and judgments. "What would you have me do?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew his answer. "Invite her," Charles said simply. "Call an oversight, blame the palace staff, blame the postal service, whatever face-saving fiction you prefer. But invite her, darling. For my sake, if not for hers. The request was reasonable, even generous in its attempt to provide her with a dignified way to reverse her decision. But it also felt like capitulation, like an acknowledgement that her judgment had been wrong, that her attempts to protect her own success had been misguided from start. Camilla stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where she and Charles had shared so many peaceful moments. The irony wasn't lost on her that this conflict was playing out against the backdrop of the place, where she had found such happiness, such security in their love for each other. "I need some time to think," she said finally, knowing even as she spoke that time was a luxury she could barely afford. The gala was now only days away, and any changes to the guest list would require extensive coordination with security, catering, and protocol staff. Charles nodded understanding, but she could see the hope in his eyes, hope that she would find a way to extend an olive branch, to choose family harmony over her own pride. That hope made her decision even more difficult, because disappointing him felt like betraying the very relationship that mattered most to her. After Charles left for his afternoon appointments, Camilla found herself alone with the weight of her choice. The palace around her seemed to echo with unspoken expectations, from staff who had worked tirelessly on the gala preparations, from Charles who hoped for reconciliation, from and who might be nursing genuine hurt behind her typical stoic facade. She thought about her own children and how she would feel if they were excluded from family events, how she would react if she sensed deliberate slight rather than innocent oversight. Despite all their difficulties, and was still family, still the woman who had welcomed Charles's children into the world, still the sister who had stood by him through his darkest moments. The afternoon wore on as Camilla wrestled with her conscience. She reviewed the guest list one more time, noting all the luminaries who would attend, all the potential for positive coverage and successful fundraising. But she also imagined the evening itself, wondering if her enjoyment would be tainted by the knowledge that she had deliberately excluded a family member, that she had chosen pride over principle. Her private secretary knocked and entered with the day's correspondence, including several more confirmations from high-profile guests. The excitement in the woman's voice as she described the growing anticipation for the event only made Camilla's dilemma more acute. So much good could come from this evening, but at what cost to family relationships? As evening approached and Charles returned from his engagements, Camilla found herself no closer to a resolution. The letter from and sat on Charles's desk like an accusation, a reminder of the hurt that her decision had caused. She could feel the weight of expectation from everyone around her, the hope that somehow she would find a way to make everything right. But making everything right seemed impossible when the very definition of right depended on which perspective she chose to prioritize. Was it right to protect an important charitable event from potential family drama? Was it right to stand firm in her role as queen consort and host the event according to her own judgment? Or was it right to prioritize family harmony above all other considerations, to extend forgiveness and invitation even when hurt and resentment ran deep? The answers weren't clear, and time was running out to find them. The morning of the charity gala dawned crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight streaming through the palace windows and casting everything in a golden glow. Under normal circumstances, Camilla would have felt nothing but excitement and anticipation for the evening ahead. Months of careful planning were about to come to fruition, and early indications suggested the event would exceed all expectations for both attendance and fundraising. But as she sat at her dressing table, applying the pearl earrings that had belonged to the late Queen Mother, Camilla couldn't shake the hollow feeling in her stomach. The situation remained unresolved, hanging over the day like a storm cloud that threatened to burst at any moment. Despite Charles's gentle pressure and her own growing doubts, she had not extended an invitation to her sister-in-law. The decision had crystallized 2 nights earlier during a particularly difficult conversation with Charles. He had approached the topic one final time with characteristic diplomacy, suggesting that perhaps they could find a way to include, and even at this late stage. But something in Camilla had hardened at his words, a stubborn pride that refused to be bent even for the sake of family harmony. "I won't be made to feel guilty for protecting something important to me," she had said, her voice carrying an edge that surprised them both. "This is my event, my responsibility, my reputation at stake. If that makes me a terrible person in Anne's eyes, then so be it. I've tried for years to earn her approval, and nothing I do ever seems to be enough." Charles had fallen silent at her words, recognizing the deep hurt that lay beneath her defensive anger. Years of perceived slights and careful exclusions had accumulated into this moment of defiance, this refusal to subordinate her own judgment to family expectations. He understood her pain, even as he regretted her choice. Now, as Camilla prepared for what should have been one of the proudest moments of her royal career, she found herself questioning everything. The guest confirmations had been overwhelming. Nearly every invitee had accepted, creating a gathering that would bring together some of the most influential voices in literature, education, and philanthropy. The auction items were generating unprecedented interest, with several lots already commanding bids well above their estimated values. Yet none of these successes felt as satisfying as she had imagined they would. Every triumph was shadowed by the knowledge that her relationship with Charles had been strained, and was nursing hurt feelings, that the extended royal family was buzzing with speculation about the exclusion. Charles had maintained his public support throughout the day, appearing at her side for photo opportunities and speaking enthusiastically about the charity's mission during brief media interviews. But Camilla could sense the effort it required, could see the careful control he exercised over his natural expressions of concern and disappointment. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor that would change everything. Lady Sarah Chatto arrived unannounced, requesting a brief private audience with Camilla. The two women had always maintained cordial relations, but they had never been particularly close, making this impromptu visit all the more significant. "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion," Sarah said as they sat in Camilla's private sitting room, "but I felt I had to speak with you before this evening's event." Camilla braced herself for what she assumed would be a diplomatic but firm rebuke about Anne's exclusion. Instead, Sarah's words took an entirely unexpected direction. "And asked me not to come here today," Sarah continued, "but I couldn't stand by and watch this situation deteriorate further. You see, Camilla, there's something you don't know about Anne's recent behavior, something that might help you understand why she's been so difficult lately." The pause that followed felt charged with possibility, as if Sarah was deciding whether to cross some invisible line of family loyalty. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of long-held secrets. "Anne's been struggling with some health concerns," Sarah said quietly. "Nothing life-threatening, but significant enough to affect her mood and her perspective on family relationships. She's been seeing specialists for several months now, dealing with some issues that have made her more fragile than usual." Camilla felt her world shift slightly, as if all her assumptions about Anne's motivations were suddenly open to re-examination. "Health concerns," she repeated, trying to process this new information. "Chronic pain issues," Sarah explained carefully, "and some related treatments that have affected her emotional equilibrium. She's been trying to maintain her usual public commitments while dealing with physical discomfort that would fell most people. I think her coolness toward you has been partly a defensive mechanism, a way of controlling what she can when so much feels beyond her control." The revelation hit Camilla like a physical blow. All this time, she had interpreted Anne's behavior through the lens of personal disapproval and family politics, never considering that there might be underlying factors she knew nothing about. The careful distance, the formal interactions, the apparent lack of warmth. What if these had been symptoms of someone struggling with private battles rather than expressions of deliberate rejection? "Why hasn't Charles mentioned any of this?" Camilla asked, though even as she spoke, she suspected the answer. "And made him promise not to discuss it," Sarah confirmed. You know how private she is about personal matters. She specifically didn't want to be treated differently or have people making allowances for her condition. But watching this situation unfold, seeing how much pain it's causing everyone involved, I felt someone needed to speak up. Camilla sat in stunned silence, reimagining months of interactions through this new lens. Anne's abrupt departures from family gatherings, her increasingly formal manner, her reluctance to engage in the casual conversation that had once characterized their relationship, all of it suddenly made sense in a way that had nothing to do with personal animosity. She really was looking forward to tonight's event, Sarah continued gently. The Literacy Foundation does work that's very close to her heart. When she realized she hadn't received an invitation, she was genuinely confused and hurt. She kept saying there must have been some mistake, that surely Camilla wouldn't exclude her from something so important. The words cut deep because they revealed the fundamental misunderstanding that had driven Camilla's decision. She had been so focused on protecting herself from perceived rejection that she had failed to consider Anne's perspective entirely. The exclusion that seemed justified in the context of past tensions appeared cruel and arbitrary when viewed through the reality of Anne's current struggles. "What should I do?" Camilla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question carried the weight of genuine desperation, a recognition that she had potentially caused irreparable damage to relationships that mattered deeply to Charles. "Invite her," Sarah said simply. "Yes, it's last minute, and yes, it will require significant logistical adjustments. But," and would come Camilla. Despite everything, despite feeling hurt and confused, she would come because she knows how important this event is to you and to Charles. As Sarah left, Camilla found herself alone with a decision that felt far more complex than her original choice to exclude Anne. Extending an invitation now would require admitting error, acknowledging that her judgment had been flawed, accepting that her protective instincts had led her astray. But it would also offer the possibility of redemption, a chance to transform this painful episode into something that might ultimately strengthen rather than damage family relationships. The practical considerations were daunting. Security would need to be notified, catering adjustments made, protocol staff briefed on the last-minute addition to the guest list. The media would certainly notice Anne's late arrival and speculate endlessly about the reasons, potentially creating exactly the kind of coverage Camilla had hoped to avoid. But as she sat in her sitting room, surrounded by the evidence of her new life as queen consort, the official portraits, the ceremonial objects, the symbols of her position within the royal family, Camilla realized that true security in that position could never come from excluding other family members. It could only come from demonstrating the grace, wisdom, and generosity that the role demanded. She thought about Charles, about the careful way he had tried to bridge the gap between his wife and his sister without forcing either of them into uncomfortable positions. She thought about his disappointment when he learned of Anne's exclusion and his quiet hope that somehow reconciliation might still be possible. She thought about the years ahead, the family gatherings and state occasions where these unresolved tensions would continue to simmer unless someone found the courage to break the cycle. Most importantly, she thought about, and not as the cold, disapproving figure she had constructed in her mind, but as a woman dealing with private struggles while trying to maintain her public duties. Someone who had devoted her life to royal service, who had supported Charles through his darkest moments, who deserved better than to be excluded from family celebrations because of misunderstandings and wounded pride. The decision, when it came, felt like stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. Camilla picked up her phone and called her private secretary, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I need you to prepare an additional invitation for tonight's gala," she said. "Princess Anne." "Yes, I know it's extremely last minute. Yes, I understand the complications it will create. But it needs to be done, and it needs to be done immediately." As the palace machinery swung into action around her last-minute change, Camilla felt a mixture of terror and relief. She had chosen vulnerability over self-protection, family harmony over personal pride. Whether this decision would lead to the reconciliation she hoped for, or to new complications she couldn't foresee, remained to be seen. But for the first time in days, she felt like she was acting in a way that honored both her position as queen consort and her role as a member of this complex, difficult, beloved family. The evening ahead would bring its own challenges, but at least she would face them with a clear conscience and an open heart. The invitation was hand-delivered to Gatcombe Park within hours, accompanied by a brief personal note from Camilla that acknowledged the late notice and expressed genuine hope that and would be able to attend. As she watched the courier's car disappear down the drive, Camilla whispered a silent prayer that she had not acted too late to repair the damage her fears had caused. The response from Gatcombe Park came faster than anyone had expected. Within 2 hours of the invitation's delivery, Anne's private secretary called to confirm her attendance, expressing gratitude for the invitation and providing the necessary dietary and security information for the evening's event. The efficiency of the response spoke volumes, and had been ready to attend all along, had likely been hoping for exactly this moment of reconciliation. Charles's reaction when Camilla told him about the invitation was immediate and profound. The tension that had shadowed his features for days melted away, replaced by a smile that seemed to illuminate the entire room. He gathered Camilla into his arms without saying a word, holding her close in a way that conveyed his relief and gratitude more eloquently than any speech could have managed. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair, and in those two simple words Camilla heard acknowledgement not just of her last-minute change of heart, but of the courage it had required to admit error and seek redemption. She had given him the possibility of having both his wife and his sister at his side during this important evening, had chosen family unity over personal pride. But even as relief flooded through the palace corridors and last-minute preparations swung into high gear, a new form of anxiety began to build. The invitation had been extended and accepted, but the actual reunion still lay ahead. Would Anne's presence create the very tensions Camilla had originally feared? Would their first interaction in this charged atmosphere be awkward and uncomfortable? Would the media scrutiny be as intense as Camilla had predicted? The afternoon of the gala was a whirlwind of final preparations. Florists made last-minute adjustments to the ballroom displays. Kitchen staff recalculated portions for the additional guest. Security teams revised their protocols to accommodate Anne's arrival. Through it all, Camilla moved with renewed energy and purpose, finally able to focus fully on the charitable cause that had inspired this entire endeavor. The Literacy Foundation's executives arrived early for a final briefing, their excitement palpable as they reviewed the evening's program and the projected fundraising totals. The auction catalog had generated international interest, with telephone bids coming in from collectors around the world who wanted to support the cause even if they couldn't attend in person. Corporate sponsors had exceeded their initial commitments, inspired by the event's growing profile and the quality of its guest list. As Camilla reviewed these details, she felt the first genuine thrill of anticipation she had experienced in weeks. This was what she had dreamed of when planning the gala, an event that would bring together passionate supporters of literacy, that would generate both funds and awareness for programs serving underprivileged children, that would demonstrate the power of royal patronage to amplify important causes. The irony wasn't lost on her that Anne's inclusion, which she had initially seen as a threat to these goals, might actually enhance them. Anne's own charitable work and education was well-respected and widely known. Her presence would signal to other potential supporters that this cause had genuine cross-party support within the royal family, that it represented shared values rather than personal agenda. As the early evening approached, guests began arriving at the palace in a steady stream of elegant cars and diplomatic vehicles. Camilla and Charles took their positions in the receiving line, greeting each arrival with warmth and gratitude for their support of the Literacy Foundation. The atmosphere was festive and purposeful, exactly what Camilla had envisioned when first conceptualizing the event. She found herself scanning each new arrival, watching for the moment when and would appear. Her sister-in-law was known for her punctuality, but also for her preference for arriving after the initial rush of guests, avoiding the media scrum that often accompanied the earliest attendees. When and finally arrived, the moment was both anticlimactic and profoundly significant. She approached the receiving line with her characteristic composed stride, wearing an elegant navy dress that Camilla recognized as one of her favorites. Their eyes met across the short distance that separated them, and, for a moment time, seemed suspended as both women gauged the other's intentions and emotions. Anne's greeting was formal but warm, her handshake firm, and her smile genuine. "Thank you for including me, Camilla," she said quietly, her words carrying layers of meaning that only the two of them could fully understand. "This is exactly the kind of cause I'm passionate about supporting." "I'm so glad you could come," Camilla replied. And, in that simple exchange, both women acknowledged the complexity of their situation while choosing to focus on their shared commitment to the evening's charitable purpose. The greeting was witnessed by dozens of other guests and several discreet photographers, but its significance was primarily personal, a moment of grace that offered the possibility of new understanding. Charles's joy at seeing his wife and sister greet each other cordially was evident to anyone who knew him well. The relief in his posture, the genuine warmth of his smile as he watched them interact, spoke to the importance he placed on family harmony. For a man who had endured decades of public scrutiny about his personal relationships, this moment represented a kind of healing that went beyond mere protocol. As the evening progressed, Camilla found herself watching Anne's interactions with other guests with new eyes. Armed with Sarah's revelation about her health struggles, she could see signs she had previously missed. The careful way and paced herself, the brief moments when she pressed her hand to her lower back, the subtle but deliberate way she chose her seating to minimize discomfort. But she also saw Anne's genuine engagement with the cause, her knowledgeable conversations about literacy programs, her thoughtful questions about the Foundation's future plans. Whatever personal tensions existed between them, Anne's commitment to educational charity was authentic and informed. Her presence added credibility and depth to the evening's mission in ways Camilla was only beginning to appreciate. The dinner itself was a triumph of coordination and diplomacy, and was seated at a table that included several education policy experts and international development leaders, positioning her as a contributor to substantial discussions rather than simply a royal ornament. Camilla watched from the head table as and engaged animatedly with fellow guests, sharing insights from her own charitable work and asking perceptive questions about global literacy challenges. When the time came for speeches, Camilla felt a nervousness she hadn't anticipated. This was her moment to address the assembled guests, to articulate her vision for the Literacy Foundation and inspire continued support for its mission. But now she was acutely aware of and sitting in the audience, her attention focused entirely on Camilla's words. The speech she delivered that night was perhaps the best of her royal career, speaking from her heart about the transformative power of literacy, about the children whose futures hung in the balance, about the collective responsibility to ensure educational opportunity for all. Camilla found a voice that was both passionate and authoritative. She spoke not just as queen consort fulfilling a ceremonial duty, but as a woman genuinely committed to making a difference in the world. When she finished, the applause was sustained and enthusiastic. But it was Anne's reaction that moved her most deeply. Her sister-in-law was among the first to stand, her applause generous, and her expression reflecting genuine appreciation for both Camilla's words and her evident sincerity. The auction that followed raised more money than anyone had dared to hope. Lot after lot exceeded its estimated value as guests bid enthusiastically for everything from signed first editions to exclusive experiences. The evening's total fundraising exceeded the Foundation's annual budget, providing resources that would support literacy programs for years to come. As the formal program concluded and guests moved to the ballroom for dancing and continued conversation, Camilla found herself approached by Anne. The two women stood somewhat apart from the crowd, creating a private space within the public event. "I wanted to thank you again for including me tonight," Anne said, her voice carrying a warmth that Camilla had rarely heard directed toward her. "I know it wasn't your original plan, and I know it required courage to change course." The acknowledgement was both generous and perceptive, recognizing the difficulty of Camilla's position without dwelling on the initial slight. It offered a path forward that honored both women's dignity while acknowledging the reality of what had transpired. "I should have invited you from the beginning," Camilla replied honestly. "I let my own insecurities cloud my judgment. You belong here, and you've always belonged here." What followed was the most honest conversation the two women had ever shared. Speaking quietly in their corner of the ballroom, they acknowledged the tensions that had existed between them, the misunderstandings that had accumulated over years, the different ways they had each struggled to find their place within the royal family's complex dynamics, and spoke about her protective feelings toward Charles, her concerns about anyone who might hurt him the way he had been hurt before. She acknowledged that these protective instincts had sometimes made her unfairly critical of Camilla, especially in the early years of their relationship. Camilla, in turn, spoke about her struggle to find acceptance within a family structure that seemed to have unwritten rules she could never quite master. She acknowledged her own defensive responses to perceived rejection, her tendency to withdraw rather than seek understanding when conflicts arose. "I think," and said thoughtfully, "we've both been trying so hard to protect the people we love that we forgot to protect our relationship with each other." The observation was astute and healing, offering a framework for understanding their past difficulties while creating space for a different kind of future. They weren't declaring themselves instant friends or pretending that years of tension could be resolved in a single conversation. But they were acknowledging shared ground and expressing mutual willingness to build something better going forward. As the evening wound down and guests began to take their leave, Camilla felt a satisfaction that went far beyond the success of the fundraising or the positive media coverage. She had learned something important about herself, about the difference between self-protection and wisdom, about the courage required to admit error and seek reconciliation. Charles approached the two women as they continued their conversation, his smile reflecting deep contentment at seeing them together. "Two of the most important women in my life," he said simply, "supporting a cause that matters to all of us." The moment was captured by a photographer, creating an image that would appear on front pages around the world the next morning. But unlike the photos Camilla had feared, images of tension and awkwardness, this picture told a story of family unity and shared purpose. It showed three people who had found a way to bridge their differences in service of something larger than their individual concerns. Later, as Camilla and Charles prepared for bed, they reflected on the evening's events with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The gala had exceeded every expectation, raising unprecedented funds for literacy programs while strengthening relationships that had been strained for too long. "I'm proud of you," Charles said as they stood together on their bedroom balcony, looking out over the gardens where they had walked through so many difficult conversations. "Not just for the success of tonight's event, but for having the courage to do what was right even when it was difficult." Camilla leaned against him, feeling the solid comfort of his presence and the deep satisfaction of work well done. The charity gala would be remembered as a triumph of fundraising and royal hospitality, but for her, its greatest success would always be the moment when she chose family over fear, connection over self-protection, love over pride. In the weeks that followed, the relationship between Camilla and continued to evolve. They began having occasional private lunches, sharing their perspectives on charitable work and family life. The conversations weren't always easy, but they were honest and increasingly warm. Both women discovered that they had more in common than they had previously recognized, including a deep commitment to using their positions to make a positive difference in the world. The Literacy Foundation thrived beyond all expectations, with the gala marking the beginning of a period of unprecedented growth and impact. But perhaps more importantly, the royal family had demonstrated that even the most entrenched tensions could be resolved through courage, honesty, and mutual respect. Years later, when asked about the most important lesson she had learned as queen consort, Camilla would often speak about that charity gala, not as an example of successful fundraising or royal protocol, but as a reminder that the greatest victories sometimes come from admitting we were wrong and finding the courage to make things right.